top 10 incredible facts about Native Americans. The human race has gone through many tragedies, leaving trails of tears behind and families separated forever. It's hard to imagine being asked to leave your habitation, where you prosper and live fine with your family. But that was the case with the first Americans. What happened to the tribe that first settled in America? The history of the Native Americans dates back to the 15th and 16th centuries, when they first landed in North America and made it their home. These guys moved from Eurasia, the present continent of Europe and Asia, to settle in the countries of North America. Native Americans were so numerous, with over 600 tribes with their cultures, languages, and even systems of government. While everything seemed blissful, danger lurked around somewhere, and their fortune soon turned into tragedy when the U.S. government sent them packing. Many Native American communities were destroyed, disrupting their way of life. In addition, they were subjected to forced assimilation policies and mistreatment, including forced attendance at boarding schools, where they were punished for speaking their language and practicing their customs. But there's so much to this ancient tribe than we got to learn about. And in this video, we'll reveal 10 facts about the Native Americans that will blow your mind. Number 10. Native Americans were the first to discover and use anesthesia. The indigenous Americans were mainly into agriculture, but beyond that, they also played a huge role in medicine. Anesthesia was nowhere near in the picture before its discovery by the Native Americans. Before then, a person would stay awake while he was operated on, but the American Indians, with their wisdom, discovered a way to end that condition. They used coca, datura, and peyote to make people unconscious before the operation. Aside from the anesthesia discovery, there are other medical inventions to thank the Native Americans for, like the syringe, early vaccination, pain relievers, and baby bottles and formula. Number 9. They participated in the American Civil War. The American Civil War largely affected the Native Americans. You may be surprised why the Native Americans joined forces with the people who previously oppressed them and killed many of their counterparts. Well, the indigenous people were staying on their land, so they had to join forces with the side that would favor them. The American Civil War was a fight between the Union and the Confederacy of the United States, which happened between 1861 and 1865. This was a fight to restore peace and unity and to guide the western part of the nation against enslavers. On the other hand, the Southern Confederate States wanted state autonomy and rights. The Native Americans were key players in this fight. Each group sided with the Southern Confederate States and Northern states. For instance, the Cherokee tribe sided with the Confederacy. Number 8. The Navajo Nation has the largest tribal land in the United States. The Navajo or Navajo tribe has the largest landmass in the United States, located within Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. The Navajo Nation calls themselves the Dine, meaning the people. The land size of the Navajo Nation is about 25,000 square miles, and this is by far the largest of any tribal land in the United States and can be compared to the west of Virginia. The Navajo tribe has the highest citizen enrollment number and outnumbered Cherokee, which previously was the highest. The Navajo guys are basketball and rodeo lovers, and Hogan is their traditional home. Number 7. Native Americans were farmers, and they first cultivated some of the crops we know today. Some thousands of years ago, the first settlers of America cultivated crops that became important crops today and are cultivated worldwide. Farming was a major occupation among them. The Native Americans cultivated squash, beans, potatoes, and other crops. They also crossbred these crops to get their different species. Corn was one of the crops the Native Americans planted as far back as 8,000 years ago in central Mexico. The crop was derived from teosinte grass, and the Native Americans to start cultivating this crop were the Pueblos. Corn became a staple food, and the seeds were imported to other countries like China and the Philippines around the 1550s. Chili peppers, cacao, and tomatoes were among the earliest crops cultivated by the indigenous Americans. Tomatoes were cultivated around 7,000 years ago. It was an important vegetable in the Aztec diet. Like other crops, they began to spread them to other countries. Reports show that 60% of the foods eaten globally were first cultivated in Native America. Number 6. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy is one of the oldest living democracies in the world. An interesting fact of Native American history is the Haudenosaunee democracy. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy of Indigenous Americans, also known as the Iroquois League in French or Five Nations in English. Archaeologists' findings reveal that the oldest league was founded around 1100 AD, but there is no exact time of discovery. The Confederacy of Iroquois consisted of 5 nations and was later changed to 6: Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and Tuscarora. These tribes resided in present northern New York, southern Ontario, and Quebec. History reveals that these 6 nations existed 800 years ago, and their mode of government operation was consensual. The Europeans had no hand in this because the Iroquois League was already operating successfully. They maintained peace and order and resolved conflicts among themselves. Interestingly, they had written down constitutions that stated laws concerning human life and properties. Number 5. The Indian Relocation Act of 1830 displaced many Native Americans. The first Americans were living fine in their habitation, but tragedy struck on May 28, 1830, when President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act into law. This law was for the relocation of American Indians from the southeast to the Indian Territory, which is present in Oklahoma. Apparently, these lands were fertile and lucrative. The Chickasaw, Seminole, and Muskogee were some tribes in that region. These tribes had gained autonomy and were doing fine, but the United States government forcefully evicted these guys from their land. Although some tribes had moved peacefully, other tribes like the Cherokees revolted. This led to the death of many Native Americans, referred to as the Trail of Tears. Indigenous Americans dwelling in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Arkansas were mostly affected. The U.S. government forcefully moved the Native Americans out of their habitation because they wanted to use these lands. The relocation was brutal because the military was also involved. Many people died and properties were lost. Number 4. American Indians became American citizens in 1924. You would think that the first Americans were supposed to be the first citizens of the United States, but that was not the case, as the Native Americans only became American citizens in 1924. The Indian Citizenship Act was proposed by Homer P. Snyder, a representative of New York, and President Calvin Coolidge signed it into law. The 1924 Indian Citizenship Act was proposed after the United States Constitution was amended for the 14th time. The Constitution states that only people born in the United States are citizens, but the first Americans were excluded. However, the signed act allowed Native Americans born in the U.S. to become U.S. citizens. This was partly to acknowledge the Native Americans who fought in the First World War. Despite signing this Citizenship Act, some American Indians were not allowed to vote. Number 3. The United States recognizes 574 Native American tribes. Before now, the American Indians were so numerous that they divided themselves into tribes spanning the Arctic, subarctic, Northwest, Plains, and Southeast. They had about 600 tribes, but the United States government only acknowledged 574 of those tribes. The U.S. government established relationships with these tribes like an independent country. Whatever happened to the other 26 tribes? We have no idea. With 229 tribes, Alaska has the highest number of tribes, followed by California with 109 tribes, and the highest number of Native American dwellers. Although the federal government recognized 66 tribes in 2020, there are still tribes yet to be recognized and hence do not benefit from government interventions and support. Number 2. Not all Native American tribes have tribal lands. The U.S. government recognizes 574 tribes of indigenous Americans, and there are 326 tribal land areas in the U.S. The numbers do not make sense, which means that about 248 Native American tribes do not have tribal lands. Oddly, the tribes that do have tribal lands occupy only about 3% of what they had before they were colonized. Number 1. The Native Americans spoke over 300 languages. The indigenous people of America were so numerous that they had different tribes, languages, and cultures. Their languages were well over 300, if not more than 1,000, and included Quechan, Aymara, Guarana, Nahuatl, Yupik, and Dakota. They even had writing styles and demographics. Among the tribes, communication was a bit difficult. Some languages were complex and difficult to understand, so they developed sign language for easy communication. However, while the Native Americans expressed themselves in their languages, the Europeans tried to suppress them. Fortunately, some of these languages are still spoken in some parts of America. Although the story of the Native Americans wasn't pleasant, we cannot forget their tremendous impact on the human race. Every November, the American Indians come together to pay tribute to their ancestors.